Chapter 3. Iltani seemed to bear scars of her own, freshly formed since Amon had seen her last. She startled easily and was timid and close-mouthed. She said she enjoyed Amon's visit, but there were many times when he had scarcely arrived before she began hinting that he should be on his way again. Amon brought up the possibility of hiring servants for the house, but Iltani quickly replied that she was just fine on her own. The thought of being surrounded by other people seemed to frighten rather than reassure her. The few times Amon chose to ignore her hints that he had overstayed his welcome, she grew irritable and waspish. In addition to walking on eggshells with Iltani, Amon found that he could not banish the darkness from his mind altogether. It always remained, poised just out of sight, ready to dart in at the least opportune moments and threaten to swallow him up again. He had to remain constantly vigilant, for the temptation to give in to the numbness and let it cover his pain was occasionally very great, especially on days when he felt the futility of life too strongly. He thought of the darkness as a gnawing mouth, swallowing up body and soul and leaving the beautiful parts to fall unnoticed to the ground, like shiny butterfly wings. Amon wandered the city after work sometimes, looking for a break from the constant activity of the warehouse, but unwilling to face Iltani's impatience and anger at his home. It was during one of these meandering walks, when he was near the great temple complex of Nana, that he heard something that caught his attention. There was a pair of young men near the temple school, one of them loud and expressive in his zeal, the other soft-spoken. The loud one was roundly criticizing faith in the gods as worse than useless. He was saying how neither prayers nor imprecations nor blessings nor cursings were of any efficacy whatsoever. His argument so closely mirrored Amon's darker thoughts during many of his meandering walks that he found himself stepping closer to hear what each of the men had to say. After a time, the loud one, a red-faced man with an aquiline nose and a prematurely receding hairline, noticed him listening and turned to him. "What have you to say on the matter?" the man asked. "I don't know," Amon replied, without any self-consciousness. "On many occasions the gods have shown me just how little they care for me. They seem utterly indifferent to my joy or my pain. I fear that even if they do truly exist, they have never taken any notice of me at all." The red-faced man was nodding. "You see, Enmul, you see?" he asked. Enmul nodded. "Yes, Ira, I see well enough," he replied. Ira continued to Amon. "Why do you say that you fear that they are so indifferent? Their very indifference is the source of our liberty. Since the gods care so little for us, what need have we to care for them at all? A man can go broke buying incense to give them sweet smells and burn 1,000 sacrifices to them, and yet that man will get no closer to achieving his desire than if he had done nothing at all." "What you say may be true," Amon agreed. "But I have a friend who swears that it is through the small, imperceptible happenstances or coincidences that the gods change fate. She says that this is why we often cannot perceive our prayers being answered." Amon was thinking of Iltani. Though she was no longer a high priestess of Inanna, she was as pious as she had ever been. She swore that their escape from the temple of Inanna, where both she and Arya had been held captive at one time, had only succeeded because Inanna had guided their way. She had always been uncomfortable when Amon or Arya had mocked the worship of Inanna in any way. Ira snorted. "If I am to worship a god, I want the one I worship to be a god of power. Let him destroy my enemies in a pillar of fire, or raise up my friends from the dead. I want nothing to do with a god so weak and inconsequential that he may only change the world through tampering with a throw of the dice." Enmul laughed. "If there ever were a god you should worship, it is the one who can change the throw of a dice for you." Ira laughed as well. "I could use a bit of help at the dicing tables of late, it is true enough." Amon said nothing. He had never understood the impulse some men had to stake their entire livelihood on the chance roll of a pair of ivory cubes. Ira suddenly clapped Amon on the shoulder and stuck out his hand. "Ah, but where are my manners?" he said. "I am Ira, and this is Enmul. By what name might we call you?" "Itana," Amon said, reaching out to take Ira's hand. Though Ur felt far enough removed from the intrigues and dangers of both Uruk and Eridu that he could nearly forget what had happened to him in those cities, yet he remembered well enough that he had nearly lost his life when someone had merely suspected his true identity. He only shared his true name with those whom experience had taught him he could trust. "Well, Itana," Ira said, "Enmul and I are temple scribes." "We'll be temple scribes when our apprenticeships are at an end," Enmul corrected. "Close enough as to make no difference," Ira said with a wave of his hand. "I own a business making pottery and transporting goods," Amon said. Enmul made a face. Amon knew well enough that merchants were not considered to be proper company for any but workmen and labourers. Ira noticed Enmul's face and waved his hand airily. "Ah well, without potters there would be no balls or jars, and then what would the rest of us do? I wouldn't have taken you for a merchant, though," Ira continued. "You speak like an educated man." "I wasn't always a potter," Amon confirmed. "But life sometimes takes unexpected turns." Too true, Ira agreed. "One day you might be the son of a gardener, and the next day you might rule the greatest empire man has ever known." Enmul laughed. "The mighty Sargon might have been the son of a gardener, but you will recall that his mother was a goddess." "A goddess with questionable taste in men," Ira agreed. "Isn't it perfectly reasonable that Inanna, goddess of fertility, should choose one who constantly plows and tills?" Enmul snickered. Amon restrained himself from pointing out that farmers, not gardeners, were the ones who used plows. He doubted that these two pampered boys would even know there was a difference between the two professions. Ira picked up the thread of his previous argument. "Great men would have us all believe that it was the will of a god that made them what they are. Men like Sargon make up stories about being set afloat in a reed basket upon the river by their goddess mothers to prove that they were chosen by the gods from the time they were small. But how did Sargon truly come to power? Was it not by rising up and slaying Ur-Zababa, his lord and master, when a favorable opportunity presented itself? Ambitious men become powerful by seizing the opportunities that life gives them. Half the gods we worship now were only men once anyway," Enmul pointed out. "Dumuzi, Enki, and Shamash, was not each one of them first a great hero, then a minor godling, then a major god?" Amon looked at Enmul oddly. "Is it truly so? I have never heard that Enki was ever anything other than a god." Enmul took on a smug look of superiority. "Ah, well, you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? It's all in the tablets, you see." Ira moved to soften his friend's arrogant statements. "In the temple of Nana, there are tablets that are very old. Some of them tell stories of the gods that are very different from the ones told now. Only the scribes ever see the old records. My mentor has a theory about how these stories changed and grew with time." "I would love to see those records," Amon said wistfully. Enmul snorted. "What would a potter want with a clay tablet?" he asked. "You could judge the quality of the mud it was made from, I suppose." Amon found that Enmul was really starting to irritate him. "I can read and write as well as any man, and quite a bit better than some, I am sure," Amon boasted, squaring his shoulders and leaning aggressively toward Enmul. Ira put a calming hand on Amon's shoulder. "Peace, Etana," he said. "Enmul sometimes thinks that he himself is a god because he has a skill few men possess." Amon took a breath and calmed himself. While he found Enmul's assertion of superior knowledge annoying, he was intrigued by the idea that he might be able to learn something about the origin of the gods by examining these ancient records. If that was ever going to be even remotely possible, he would have to cultivate a friendship with these men. "I apologize," Amon said. "I sometimes take it ill when others assume they know all about me simply because of the work I choose to do now." Ira said, "In the lands of Kush, far to the east, the labor a man must perform is known as soon as he is born. The greatest sin a man may commit there is to set his hand to do anything above the station he was born to. In Sumeria, though, a man may rise or fall by the application of his own genius. A gardener truly did become an emperor, and many another man has defied the path that fate set for him, choosing instead to become something that he willed for himself." Amon found himself nodding. "Well said, Ira," he agreed. "The day grows late, and we have many tablets yet to copy before the sun goes down," Enmul told Ira. "Too true," Ira said with a groan. "Etana, Enmul and I frequently meet with a group of like-minded friends to discuss matters such as those you have heard us chewing over today." Enmul was surreptitiously waving his hands to warn Ira off from the invitation he was about to make, but Ira ignored him. "It is always pleasant to get a fresh perspective from someone new. Would you consent to join us when we next meet at the Tavern of the Moon, just west of the temple?" Ira asked. "It would be an honor," Amon said, taking satisfaction from the obvious dismay his answer gave to Enmul. When Amon decided to stop by to visit Iltani and Sarah on his way back to the warehouse, he felt much more clear-headed and even-tempered than he had felt in a long while. Unfortunately, he found Iltani frazzled and irate. She seemed very eager for a fight, but Amon thought it best to try something different than the bickering that more and more frequently capped off each brief visit. "You've been taking care of little Sarah all day," he said. "And though I am sure my darling daughter is always a perfect angel, even so I am betting you could use a break. You don't get out of the house much. Would you like to go somewhere alone now? Or if you prefer, the three of us could go for a walk and then eat at the tavern. Iltani was prickly. I just finished making dinner. Am I supposed to throw all this food out? She asked. Amon aimed for conciliatory rather than sarcastic. Oh, did you make dinner already? Would you like to eat first and then go for a walk? There are dozens of kinds of wildflowers blooming just now along the river. Some of us are too busy to go meandering about the city constantly, she grumbled, but Amon could tell it was just a rearguard action. I believe that I have not shown you proper gratitude for all you do for little Sarah, he said penitently. I have been a very poor brother indeed. We aren't really brother and sister, you know, Iltani said contrarily. Sometimes it seems that you forget that fact. The important thing is that we argue as if we really were brother and sister, Amon said ironically. That had been the wrong thing to say, and Amon knew it as soon as it came out of his mouth. Iltani looked as if she was getting ready to unleash her full temper. Do you know what your problem is? Iltani asked rhetorically. Amon felt himself tempted to fall back into his sarcastic rut and have a really good row. He felt doubly irritated because he was trying to offer an olive branch, but Iltani was using it to start a bonfire. He took a big breath and then made one last try. My biggest problem is that I am thoughtless, but a secondary problem is how much I have been taking you for granted, he said. I really wish I had thought to pick some of those wildflowers to bring you before I decided to stop by. Will you allow me to make it up to you now? Iltani paused with her mouth open, momentarily stymied in the tirade she had been ready to launch. Well, yes, she agreed. Amon wasn't sure which of his statements she was saying yes to, but he chose to act as if it were the last. Did you hear that, Saratum Lamagiri? He asked, snatching up his daughter from where she was rolling around on the floor, trying to stuff her foot into her mouth. We are going out. Amon found the blanket Iltani liked to use to wrap Sarah when it was evening, and he rolled her up in it, and then he grabbed Iltani by the hand and pulled her toward the door. Wait, she protested. I'm not dressed to go out. Not a chance, Amon replied. You look fine as you are now, and if we don't leave immediately, we'll lose the last bit of daylight. Iltani reluctantly allowed herself to be dragged along. Amon spotted a spray of tiny white flowers growing along the side of the road. He plucked the baby's breath and gave a sprig to Sarah to play with, then brushed back a few of Iltani's raven locks and put the flower in her hair, just above her ear. There, now you are all dressed up, he quipped. With flowers in your hair, no one will ever notice your dirty feet. How very thoughtful of you, Iltani replied ironically. That's me, the soul of thoughtfulness, Amon answered. So when are you going to hire a proper nursemaid and throw me out of your house? Iltani asked, with such bitterness that Amon was taken aback. I had no thought of doing anything of the sort, Amon answered honestly. This little charade of ours cannot go on indefinitely, Iltani said. Sooner or later you are bound to want your house back. You will find someone to care for Sarah, and I will be out on the street. I've already found someone to care for Sarah, Amon replied. What? Who? Iltani asked, with such a desperate look in her eye that Amon at once regretted his approach to the issue. You cannot get just anyone to care for your daughter. She is... You, Amon interrupted. I found you. Anyone can see by the smile on your face that she adores you, and it seems you have grown fond of her as well. Why would I want to change anything when it is as if Enki himself sent you? Oh, well, Iltani said, relief apparent in her voice and manner. It seems providential that you found Sarah and me when you did, Amon continued. You never have explained how it was that you came to find Sarah and me outside the city when you did. I wasn't in my right mind, and who can say what might have happened if you hadn't come along? Maybe nothing, but maybe something bad. I was in the temple of Inanna, praying for... Iltani trailed off as she took a sidelong glance at Amon. Help, she said at last, though it was clear that that wasn't what she had been intending to say. I saw you walk by with Sarah. I wasn't sure at first if it was really you, and I decided that even if it was, there was no reason for me to talk to you. I was continuing my prayer when I felt something. I can't explain it properly. It was just a strong feeling that I should go and speak with you. I had the impression that you needed my help for some reason, so I hurried to follow you. I just lost sight of you in the market, and had just decided that what I was doing was silly when I glimpsed you on the other side of the market, apparently headed for the city gate. I felt the same feeling as before, even stronger this time. I was sure that you needed my help, so I rushed across the market and just caught up to you there above the river. Well, whichever god or goddess whispered in your ear, whether Enki or Ninhursag or Inanna, I am grateful that you came to us when you did, Amon replied. Will you continue to care for Sarah? Yes, of course, Iltani replied. She did not mention that she had no other prospects and no firm idea of what she could possibly do otherwise. She had learned by hard experience that the city was a menacing and dangerous place for a woman on her own, without husband or family. She had lost the miserable employment she had found cleaning a tavern when she had been absent a few days to see Sarah and Damon, and she wasn't at all sure that she could trust to luck to lead her to another such place where the proprietor was a widow who had taken pity on her. You mentioned me wanting to eventually live in my home again, Amon said after a moment. For now, the best place for me is the warehouse. The activity and all the people there help me keep the darkness at bay. What darkness? Iltani asked, confused. The inky cloud of soul-crushing black that some demon began afflicting me with after Arya died, he replied matter-of-factly. Only work and other people nearby seem to help keep it at bay. But you are right, sooner or later I will want to move back in. Even now, I want to be with my daughter more than I am, but you seem to be afflicted by a demon of a different kind, one that makes you shy and wary of other people. Yes, Iltani agreed reticently. She did not want to talk about all of the horrible things that had happened to her over the past months that had taught her to distrust nearly everyone, and most especially the savage men that seemed to exist everywhere in Ur, who all bore the selfsame evil gleam in their eyes when they saw her. Well, if you are to continue to care for Sarah for a long time, then there must be more servants in the house when I move back there. Unless... He left the word hanging. Unless what? Iltani wanted to know. He took a deep breath, then asked, Do you remember when Akala invited me and Balashi to the temple for dinner, back when we were all in Uruk? What a terrible night that was, Iltani said, recalling the night when the slender thread of hope she had been clinging to that Amon might be able to help her somehow had been snapped by Akala. I didn't find it so, Amon replied. You and Balashi were grilled unmercifully by Akala's toadies, and then you were forbidden to ever see me again, Iltani said. What part of that did you find pleasant? The part where you kissed me, Amon said, though afterwards Balashi told me that I was a fool for falling in love with you and he ordered me to stop. And what did you say? Iltani asked. I told him that it was too late, that I thought I had fallen in love with you the first time I saw you, Amon said matter-of-factly. Did Balashi tell you that you were an idiot? Iltani asked. Yes, he did, Amon confirmed. He was right. You can't fall in love with someone you barely know anything about, Iltani asserted. Yes, that's exactly what Balashi told me, Amon said. He said that trying to save you, only to end up dragging you out across the desert and from town to town, was a bad idea. He said that you would be too prissy to handle sleeping on the ground and walking for league after league, day after day. Oh, really? Iltani asked, offended. Well, you did live a life of relative luxury and comfort, Amon said. Balashi tried to convince me that leaving you in the temple would be best for both you and me. And what did you say to that? Iltani asked. I told Balashi that our love was like a plant, that it was only a tiny sapling then, but that it might grow into a great oak tree, Amon said. How poetic, Iltani said. Yes, I thought so, Amon agreed. And then you met Arya and forgot all about me, Iltani said. You plucked up the sapling, root and branch, and tossed it into the fire. Well, I didn't forget about you completely, Amon demurred. I just decided that I had been acting as childishly as Balashi had told me, and that I didn't truly know you well enough to actually love you. I recognized that I had developed a teenage infatuation for you and nothing more, since it was so easily dispelled by another. It was a silly, romantic dream. I loved the idea of you that I created in my head, I admit it, but even so... Amon trailed off as he tried to formulate his thoughts. Even so? Iltani prompted. Even so, I had sworn that I would help you and protect you, Amon answered. And my father taught me that swearing an oath like that should never be undertaken lightly. I meant to free you from your captivity and ensure that you would be cared for, and my oath still holds. Sarah began fussing, and Amon turned to her and began shushing and bouncing her. They had traveled outside the city gates now and were walking along the river path. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, and the sky was turning red and golden. A flight of geese passed overhead, honking and calling to each other. Her heart in her throat, Iltani decided to take a chance. So, what has happened to the poetic sapling you mentioned? She asked. Amon picked up a rock and threw it into the river. He watched the rings spreading out from the splash for a time before he answered. To be honest, I don't know, Amon replied. I think that it is winter in my heart. The black cloud stirred up by the demon has covered everything over and frozen it. But who knows? In a few months, maybe spring will come, and it might be that the sapling could be made to grow again. He picked up another rock from the ground, a flat one this time, that he sent spinning so that it skipped across the surface of the water 4, 5, 6 times. Maybe with some attention, some sunlight and rain and fertilizer, Amon said hesitantly. Oh, Inanna, Iltani replied. No more fertilizer. I have had quite enough of your crap. Amon turned to look at Iltani and barked out a surprised laugh. To have her crack a joke in the middle of such a somber and serious discussion was something he would never have expected. Iltani smiled at his response and then tried to explain herself. The thing I always liked most about you is your silver tongue. You always made me laugh despite myself, and that is a true gift. Laughter makes my burdens seem lighter and my worries seem less important. I think that the both of us could do with a good deal more laughter then, Amon answered, suppressing a sigh.